Welcome to the Explainer. Let me ask you a question right out of the gate. As a functional business analyst, do you actually know the exact sequential mechanics of your system's pricing engine? Or are you just entering data and hoping for the best? Because if you're just guessing, well, you're missing the most critical part of your job. Our core ethos here is simple. If you're still just consuming, you're already behind. It's time to start learning what everyone else ignores. Today, we're going to completely master the underlying search logic of Microsoft Dynamics AX. Let's establish our baseline. You already know trade agreements aren't just simple lists of prices or generic discounts. Think of them as strict architectural rules. They are essentially a highly structured filtering engine built directly into the system to determine the exact valid price applied to your quotes, your orders, and your invoices. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be covering the trade agreement engine, search priority and logic, the find next directive, price search dimensions, and finally, smart rounding and currencies. Let's dive in.
Section 1, the trade agreement engine and logic prioritization.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the engine's combination priority funnel. The search logic always prioritizes from hyper-specific down to broad. First, it looks for a specific table, like a specific account matched with a specific item. If it doesn't find a match there, it widens the net to a group. And if that still fails, it falls back to all. As an analyst, you actually hold the keys to this funnel. By configuring the Activate combination setup, you can deliberately restrict these searches. Doing this doesn't just vastly improve system performance by limiting the search scope, but it literally eliminates the risk of incorrect price overlaps. It's a real game changer.
Moving on to Section 2, Search Priority and Engine Search Logic.
Now, consider what actually happens when a user asks the system for a price. The moment that request hits an order line, the engine runs a really strict checklist. We're talking customer, item, dimensions, quantity, unit, currency, and date. And it stops the exact moment it hits a valid agreement with the Find Next option cleared, or when it just totally exhausts all its options. Oh, and if it finds multiple valid matches within a combination, the lowest price always wins.
Let's actually trace the engine's logic with an example. Say the engine is searching for customer US-001 and item A001. It hits the very first line, which is a valid €10 price. Because that Find Next box is cleared, the search halts immediately. It completely ignores the €8 price sitting right there.
But what about a total edge case? What if you have two absolutely identical valid trade agreements for the exact same customer and item, and both have Find Next cleared? How does the system possibly break the tie? Well, it looks at the back-end database. The engine uses the lowest rec ID value in the price disk table to crown the winner. Pretty cool, right?
All right, Section 3, the Find Next directive and controlling those searches.
This Find Next checkbox is honestly one of the most misunderstood modifiers in the entire system. Let's look at legacy AX 2009 logic versus AX 2012 and later. In the older 2009 version, the system only had a quantity field. That meant Find Next was absolutely mandatory if you wanted the engine to keep searching for volume price breaks. But then AX 2012 introduced a brilliant fix, quantity from and quantity to ranges.
By utilizing these explicit closed quantity intervals, like say 0 to 10 pieces, the engine basically skips evaluating invalid agreements just to find a volume break. The behavior becomes so much more logical, and it drastically increases your search efficiency.
Which brings us to Section 4, Search Dimensions, covering product and tracking setup.
Here's a little secret a lot of analysts miss. Product, tracking, and storage dimensions, they're essentially invisible to the search engine. Seriously, unless you explicitly check them as active search dimensions in your setup, the system just completely ignores them.
But once they are active, the engine sifts through dimension-specific agreements using a super strict three-step fallback priority. First, it tries to perfectly match the active dimensions on the requesting document. If that fails, it tries to match the dimensions in the product dimension group. And if that still yields absolutely nothing, step 3 is a fallback to trade agreements with no dimensions specified at all.
And finally, Section 5, Smart Rounding, including currencies and rules.
If you're using generic currencies, there is absolutely a crucial parameter in accounts receivable you need to know about. It's the Apply Smart Rounding After Currency Conversion toggle. This basically dictates that smart rounding has to execute after a generic currency is converted in real time. Now, you might be wondering, why do we even need this?
Well, because different countries have different smallest denomination coins, like the 1-cent coin in the US or the 50 coin in Denmark. This creates dominant retail price endings. So the system uses custom syntax like #.95 mapped to upper and lower limits to intentionally force those specific cultural price endings.
Let's break down the math behind common symmetric arithmetic rounding. If your value hits the half-point threshold, meaning the value is greater than or equal to a plus 0.5, the system rounds up to the nearest upper limit. If it's less, it rounds down to the nearest lower limit. It's perfectly symmetric.
Now contrast that standard symmetric rounding against shift-axis rounding. With shift-axis, the math is intentionally offset. So instead of rounding to a whole integer, the mathematical axis literally shifts, for example, evaluating at minus 0.05 instead of 0. This allows you to force those non-symmetric retail endings like 0.95.
Of course, to prevent total chaos, Dynamics AX has some pretty strict architectural guardrails in place. The system validation rules flat out reject overlapping rounding intervals, plus your lower limit must be less than your syntax, and your syntax has to be less than your upper limit. The system will mathematically block you from saving an impossible rule. There's just no way around it.
And this brings us full circle. Remember our motto? If you're still consuming, you're already behind. Start learning what others ignore. By really mastering these hidden filters, the Rec ID tiebreakers, the fallback dimensions, and the shift-axis rounding limits, you stop being just a software user. You literally become a software architect.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to take back to your desk. Now that you know the engine's exact search path, what pricing errors in your system can you finally fix today? Open up your Dynamics AX environment, audit your setups with this new perspective, and take total control of your pricing engine. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.